You're listening to the Nutrition Experts Podcast, featuring guests who take the scientific talk about food and break it down for practical use. You've heard the phrase, "You are what you eat." Come find out what that really means. Experience conversations with experts in the field of nutrition and understand the power of food for our health, well-being, and beyond. Now, here's your host, registered dietitian and nutritionist, Mathea Ford.
Hi there, it's Mathea. Welcome back to the Nutrition Experts Podcast. The podcast featuring nutrition experts who are leading the way using food starts today, right now, with our next guest. It's great to have Ranelle Kirchner on the show today. Ranelle, welcome to Nutrition Experts.
Hi, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I know I'm excited to have you on the show and share your expertise with my tribe. You have a very interesting story, so I'd love to let you tell my listeners a little more about you and what you do.
Absolutely. So I'm a dietitian, chef, and certified diabetic educator. I have really paved this path of trying to combine the two worlds of both cooking, culinary arts, and nutrition, because as similar as they seem, they're two very different worlds. And so it's been my passion and ambition to bring those two worlds together to better help people in terms of, changing the way they live to lead a healthier lifestyle, and really show people how great food can be, because there's a lot of simple things that you can do to make it healthy.
So you mentioned that you have a culinary background, and can you talk a little bit about how you chose that and where you went, and then kind of where it's led you?
My path of education is certainly a unique one. I went to school at the University of Minnesota to initially become a surgeon, but my mind kept wandering during this time to the kitchen while I was studying. So after my first year of pre-med, I changed my career path, left the U, started taking class at the Cordon Blue in Minnesota. It was an amazing experience that led me to start working in France. But while I was abroad, I gained a new perspective on life and in food. So I was able to witness and live the French way of eating and living, and realize that their relationship was so vastly different from what I knew and how I grew up. My views changed, and I decided I wanted to be more on this path of becoming an educator. And that's when I transitioned into the dietetic path.
So you mentioned in France that you noticed they had a different relationship with food. What would you say was the difference that you found?
I really noticed that the difference lied in the relationship with how they treated food, how they perceived food, respecting their body. When, they felt full, they just stopped eating. There was no reason to gorge themselves. And it was always about fresh produce and fresh foods, really taking care of the ingredients as they were cooking. So if something was in season, that would be the highlight of their foods for that week or that day. It was different because it was more about them listening to their bodies, and also just trying to incorporate those fresh flavors that were seasonal.
So I guess you didn't see a lot of pre-prepared foods or highly processed foods when you were there. Of course, you were there for some cooking events or, schooling. So that might have affected it a little bit. What was their process for getting food? I mean, you said they always got fresh.
Right. A big emphasis was on fresh. Even the refrigerators were much smaller, and they went shopping on a weekly, almost daily basis, and always just focusing on the fresh foods. And a lot of times it was just done at an open air market, even in, the middle of winter.
Yeah, that is a pretty big contrast to how we eat here, huh?
It is. And, everybody knew the vendors. Everybody had a relationship with who was selling their food, so they knew where their food was coming from. They were able to ask questions about how it was grown. And it was never about overindulgence, and price was never a factor. I think that having that good relationship with the farmers weren't overcharging because they knew who they were serving, for one. But it was a very unique experience.
How would you compare that to a farmer's market in the United States? Is it very similar, or?
I think there's a lot of similarities, but even from the different places I've lived in the States, it does change state to state. I felt like in Chicago, I didn't feel like there was much of an opportunity for that bonding. It was more of an exchange process, as where, here in Minnesota, we have so many farmers markets that I love to go to. And I have a couple that I frequent a lot, even in the winter time. And the relationships I have with them, I feel, have been a little bit stronger. So it's definitely location based.
Yeah, that makes sense that, if you're going to basically, if you're talking about the French people, they're going to the markets, they're buying what's in season, they're using it within the next couple days. I think in the United States, people feel like I really don't have time to shop every couple days and go to the farmer's market. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's really important to address because we are a different society where we are more on the go. We don't have as much vacation time or time away from work or even to enjoy our meals during the times that we're working. So when we take a lunch break, it's rush, 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 and then back to work or eating while you're working, and that's not healthy. But there are some things that you can do. So for instance, when you go to the market, you can make your food last. You can go once a week. You can buy things that will perish faster, but then balance that with foods that don't perish as easily. So buying things like squash in the winter time is a great example because you don't need to use squash that week or that day. You can store it for months. So I guess you could say it's all about variety.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So like your lettuce is going to go bad, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 days. And so you would eat that. If you went to the market, you would eat that earlier in the week. And then maybe you'd have some squash with your meal later in the week.
Right. So a lot of that comes into play with meal planning. If you are planning out your week, then you'll know which foods that you should be eating sooner rather than later in the week when you do your shopping either at the market or the grocery store, and even a combination of the two.
Yeah, so I want to come back to meal planning in a second, but what made you decide to go on and become an RDN after you had your culinary education?
I didn't think anyone would listen to a chef about nutrition, and I certainly wanted to have that expertise and be evidence-based in what I tell people. So it was more that I felt like I needed to do my due diligence and go back to school and understand the nutritional aspect of food as well. So I went back really for the credentials, the experience, really just to make sure that I'm best helping people to my capabilities.
You mentioned meal planning a couple minutes ago, and how do you do your meal planning? How do you talk to your patients about or customers about meal planning?
Well, I use a couple different approaches because I do use a service called Eat Love, which is a digital platform that can tailor nutrient and disease-specific needs. So I have that service, which is great for maybe helping people get started with their own meal planning. But I still try to address things that people can do for basic meal planning, like keeping a pantry full of non-perishables to keep it simple during the week when you put together a menu 1 week at a time, or cooking in batches. So those are some tips that I use for meal planning that anyone can use so that it's more approachable. But certainly for those who are really busy and don't want to think about finding recipes and they're on the go all the time, the Eat Love program and platform is truly amazing. And a lot of people find great benefit from it because there's a lot you can do within it, and it even prints out your grocery list.
So do you have any specific tips about meal planning? You mentioned basic meal planning, cooking in batches, that type of thing. But when you're talking to somebody about meal planning for maybe a week, what do you encourage them to do?
I like to put a lot of emphasis on plant-based foods in my teachings. So really looking at, okay, where are your vegetables coming from in the week? Making sure that you're getting those 3 to 5 servings, because a lot of people struggle getting the recommended vegetable servings in a week. So I think focusing on one thing is a good place to start, and then gradually making changes throughout the week. Protein is typically not an issue for most people, although with some of my vegan patients it is. You can certainly have a protein-rich diet as a vegan.
You really are going to encourage somebody to kind of change maybe part of their meal, not necessarily do the whole thing at once. But if you're trying to move to more plant-based or healthier eating, you're maybe changing a few things every week, just building those in to your process. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, because I think it can be overwhelming when someone comes to you and they ask you, they want to make these big changes in their life. But if you don't do it gradually and slowly, it can seem like it's too much and that it's unsustainable. And I want this to be sustainable and a lifelong change.
So can you talk a little bit more about your partnership with Eat Love and how that works?
It's a collaborative agreement where I write recipes for Eat Love. So you'll see many of my recipes appear on their platform. And in exchange, I use the platform for my patients to essentially plan out their meals. And we can start small for either, maybe we emphasize dinners for that week, but it has the capability of doing snacks, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and you can also add on other members in the family too. So even if it's a meal plan that's meant for you, we can add on other people so that it is more family friendly, because let's be honest, it's not all for ourselves. Sometimes we do want other people in our loved ones to be included in the process. What it also does is I'm also able to tailor disease specific. So whether you have diabetes, if you have dietary restrictions, all of that can be factored into this meal planning.
So is it all dietitians that contribute recipes, or?
All dietitians write these recipes.
So can any dietitian do that? Can they collaborate with Eat Love to write recipes if they wanted, or to even just use the platform for their patients?
Dietitians can subscribe to the platform and pay a fee. I'm not sure that they're looking for dietitians right now, but if you are interested in writing recipes, I can certainly put you in touch with the correct person if you're interested in writing recipes as a dietitian, because that is what they focus on. I think it can be tricky writing the recipes because things that they look for is few ingredients that have a big emphasis on vegetables, and then seasonality, as well as trying to fit these different types of eating. So right now there's been a lot of requests for low FODMAP foods, diabetes or diabetic friendly recipes, and certainly more plant-based.
You mentioned that you traveled to France. Do you travel doing anything else, or I think you like to travel. So can you talk a little bit about that? How you learn through your travel and how you use that in your practice?
Traveling has always been a big part of my life. And when I go to a new place, I really just throw myself in. So it's not staying in nice hotels. It's trying to find the most rural parts of the country and really just engaging with the people. So I do my best at trying to learn their language. It's not always easy, but with the help of technology, it's become easier. And really just picking my experiences based off of where I can learn the most from. Okay, well, what's going on with this culture? What are their holidays? Am I going to be there during a holiday or something that's really important to them? What are their local foods? Where do they hang out? And so I really try to go to those types of places, and it's all about finding those little hole in the wall restaurants. And if I get sick, I get sick. It's a great experience.
Build up your immunity.
Right.
So what's the last place you went to?
The last place I went to was, where did I go? I was in Germany and Amsterdam. I had been to the southern part of Germany, but I went with my boyfriend to the northern half to go visit family. And so we were able to go to these small little towns all throughout the northern half and really just see what people were eating, learn some really great foods and cultural influences on, Turkish food especially. discovered a lamachun, which is an amazing, it's one of my favorite foods right now. It's basically a flatbread like pizza with all these different spices, tomato, lamb, and then it has a nice thin yogurt sauce with fermented cabbage and other fresh vegetables. It's delicious. It was a really great travel as well, because I was able to then meet a lot with the locals and hear about what their traditions were, how they eat. And then I'm looking forward to my next trip where I'm going to Israel this May.
Okay.
So that'll be another good food experience.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you really get in depth with the culture and try to, at least you try all the foods and, kind of see what you can incorporate. So,
I will try everything once.
I can't say that I'm that way. If you tell me what's in it, I'm probably going to judge. So I'll probably decide what to eat that way.
And, it's interesting too, because some of the places I've been, I've learned so much. For instance, when I was in Indonesia, I spent 3 weeks traveling from island to island and realized how hard it was to find food. It wasn't easy. It was, first of all, it was hard to travel and to find people to take me places. But once I got to a place, you had to know someone in order to find a meal.
Oh, wow.
There weren't restaurants. There weren't markets. Occasionally you'd find a market on the side of the street just to pick up some fresh food. But really, people were just growing food for themselves and selling it to each other. So that was really interesting just to see that exchange. And also it was very spiritual and how big religion played a role into their culture.
Yeah, I just had another podcast a couple weeks ago about somebody talking about religion and how it can deeply affect someone's choices. And you need to understand it basically so you can have that basis to know if they're a vegetarian because of religious reasons versus vegetarian because of social reasons. It's important to understand that can help you do better with your education of them. So absolutely. So you have this, you go around, you travel, you learn about all these different foods and stuff. And so obviously you like making recipes. When you're making a recipe or you're looking at a recipe that you have, how do you modify it to make it healthier? What are some of the things you typically do?
Well, because I am more plant-based, I swap a lot of the animal fats for plant-based fats. So if it calls for lard, which is common in many cultures, I will swap it out for maybe olive oil, or, a vegetable-based oil. Maybe it's even avocado. It's really interesting because once you cook enough, it's easier to determine which things you can omit completely and then which things you can substitute or even cut half the fat out of. So it is recipe by recipe based. So that's one of the things to get started is really just getting in the kitchen and just cooking more, experimenting with food. So you know what works and what doesn't work, but you have to just get started.
So when somebody's cooking in their kitchen, what are some of the things that you would say they should start with if they're trying to change a recipe to make it a little healthier besides the fat thing? I know you said try, but where should they start?
So I guess it would depend. I think a good place, though, to start would be to look at your favorite foods. Maybe it's mac and cheese. Okay, so if we take mac and cheese as an example, let's maybe avoid the cream and maybe we use a lower fat milk. Or maybe we do keep it full fat, but then look more at the portion size and then play with vegetables. So let's add some Brussels sprouts. Let's add some kale. Let's, make it healthier in that regard. Maybe even use whole wheat pasta or a bean pasta. Bean pastas are starting to become really popular, and it's great for those who are gluten intolerant.
So what do you think of when you're thinking of like an ingredient that you use a lot? It seems to be just really versatile that you like to always have around. What to put in recipes? What are you got anything like that?
Yes, the incredible edible egg. The egg is amazing. I use it I always have eggs on hand because it's a great source of protein. It's affordable. You can soft boil it, poach it, fry. You can shire it, bake it, use it in a sauce. I'm always amazed by the possibilities because you can use it for both sweet and savory as well. It can make or break a recipe because it offers that simple richness to a dish and can be a really nice finishing touch.
So egg in a dish tends to, I know it's an emulsifier, it brings things together. What other properties does it add to a dish that somebody might want that they might use it for?
People might use it just for its protein content, but it's an easy ingredient to manipulate. And it's also, you can have it hot, you can have it cold. And I think it just offers that added fullness and roundness to a meal. Because if you think about when you're cooking, you try to create balance, and it's going to offer that fattiness as well as that structure to a dish. So it can really make something complete.
So I know you mentioned at the beginning of the call that you were a certified diabetes educator. How did you decide to go? So you started cooking and then you said, oh, I see how food and nutrition go together. So I want to be a dietitian. How was the next step to being a certified diabetes educator?
I was working in Chicago at the time and had just left working in kitchen management at Rush University Medical Center to then start running my own kitchen as a food service director at a smaller hospital. And because it was smaller, I wore many hats and soon found myself doing outpatient care with an emphasis in diabetes because that's what the population was. And after seeing how many people were affected by diabetes and how little resources was available for patients, I decided that was my next move, was to put an emphasis on diabetes and work towards being certified. So worked for a couple years in that role. At the time, I wasn't certified, but I later became certified when I moved to Minnesota. But really just seeing the need for diabetic educators is really how I decided to make that change completely.
So now day to day in Minnesota, what is it that you do with your patients? Do you do different types of classes? Do you teach them how to cook?
I do a little bit of everything. I certainly teach people how to cook. I offer lots of cooking classes. I cook at a couple of places. Actually, I cook at 4 different sites all around food. And then I also teach nutrition classes through Blue Cross Blue Shield. And a lot of times I get questions about, how to change their diet and what can they do for cooking. So it's a little bit more integrated in that role. And then I'm also doing a lot with diabetes education at a place called Neighborhood Health Source, which is an FQHC, a federally qualified healthcare center. And then in addition to that is my telehealth business. So I see patients online and it's all done virtually.
Yeah, it sounds like you really blended all that together, where you started to where you are today, kind of blend it all together. And I know a lot of dietitians don't love food service type things, but I'm a food service dietitian. I love food service. I love recipes. I love cooking. And so I love it when a dietitian can blend it all together and talk about those practical things, like adjusting recipes, changing the way you make choices about food. You have any tips for how you help people kind of figure out what goals they're going to do and then how to stick to them?
The idea is to start small. So choose one thing at a time. And when you make that choice on what you want to fix, then we put together a SMART goal. The specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and relevant and timely.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we want to combine all those elements when we put together our goals. And then slowly working towards that, putting together a timeline. We want to make sure that it's a goal that is relevant to you, achievable, because otherwise, then what's the point? Is it going to be sustainable? Probably not. So if it happens to be that you want to change something in your diet to simply add more vegetables, then maybe we would start by saying, okay, well, what do you want to do for this week? Okay. So this week, maybe we look at what vegetables might be missing. So I tell people, try to eat the rainbow, meaning eat every color. And then if there's a color you're missing, then maybe we focus on that food group. So purple, blue, that's often the one that's forgotten. So we want to make sure we include those foods and take it from there.
So thinking about the listeners, they are dietitians, they're healthcare professionals, and they're sometimes, some of them are just regular people. I guess we're all regular people. But so thinking about those people, what kind of tips would you give them to use the information we talked about today in their business, in their life, in their working with patients?
Listen to the patients and their needs. What are they truly trying to accomplish? And is it realistic for them? Because so many times people come to me with a goal and it might not be realistic. And so working through the expectations of, okay, you come here, you want help with weight loss, so let's talk about it. Because oftentimes too, there's underlying issues. So you want to get to the root cause of why they're doing something. And is it for them? Is it healthy? Also, when you get stuck, it's okay to reach out to other professionals and make referrals, refer to each other. If I have a patient who comes to me and there's clearly something that needs to be worked out with a psychologist, I'm going to make a referral because that's not my area of expertise. And so, building that network is also important. So making sure that you are finding patients help that they need in other areas is vital and important to make them truly successful. Because that's the point. That's why we do this. We do this to help people and we want people to be successful.
Absolutely. Those are great tips. So the last question I always ask is, Ranelle, tell me what is your favorite food? And since you're a foodie, you can pick a couple if you like.
Wild mushrooms are certainly one of those top favorite foods. One of my favorite dishes to make is this wild mushroom toast with melted taleggio cheese and an easy over egg and a side green salad. It is just to die for. It is truly amazing. And I really cannot help but say that ice cream. I love my ice cream. Can be super simple. Vanilla is totally fine. I have it as my special treat, but it's just so good and creamy and rich and full.
Well, I think you have to enjoy food. I mean, if it's all cardboard or it's all not flavorful, which is what people expect they have to eat when they eat healthy, then that's no good, So.
Exactly. You have to live life and food is part of that. So you should love the foods that you eat. It's just all about respecting your body and the food as well.
So where do you find wild mushrooms? Do you go to a farmer's market or do you find them in a store?
I do. I often go to this place. It just opened up down the street from where I live called Keg and Case, and they have a vertical mushroom farm. And so they grow all mushrooms on site. It's pretty amazing, but the farmers markets also have great wild mushrooms that I like to go to. It's a little bit harder to find in the winter time. So during the winter, I'll certainly just walk down the street.
All right, Ranelle, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. I know my listeners learned a lot about food recipes, how you cook, and how basically you can enjoy food. So if listeners want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. They can go to my website at Ranelle Kirchner.com. That's RanelleKirchner.com. And you can also find me on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I'd be happy to answer any and all of your questions. And I really appreciate taking your time to be on the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, guys, this has been another great episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast, the podcast that is all about learning more so you can do more with nutrition in your life.
You've just listened to an episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast. Be sure to get more information about this week's episode at www.nutritionexpertspodcast.com. Tune in next time for another great conversation with a nutrition expert and expand your personal knowledge in the field of nutrition, one conversation at a time.